So, I mean, so this comes out. So, so this is the third video on the second proof of God's existence. And this is really just a short transition video to begin talking about the fourth meditation. So, at the end of the meditation, the third meditation, Descartes is now in a position to treat whether God is a deceiver very quickly. So after reiterating that God is the possessor of all the perfections and is subject to no defect whatsoever, Descartes says, and this is here on your handout, it's clear enough from this that he cannot be a deceiver, since it is manifest by the natural light that all fraud and deception depend on some defect. So the idea is, it's manifest to reason, the natural light. It's something we distinctly perceive that all fraud and deception depend on some defect. And so it's manifest that God cannot be a deceiver. Why? Well, let's think about it. So God is omnipotent. What would his being a deceiver now mean, now that we see that he's got omnipotent and perfect? Well, he would create us with a being that would necessarily make errors. So if he were a deceiver, then our nature would be such as to necessarily go wrong by its very essence, by the way it's created. And the question is, could God have made a being whose nature tends towards error, who through its own power gets to error? And Descartes thought it, obviously not. Obviously not. Why? Well, God is the source of being. There's no being that's not created and preserved by God. God keeps everything in existence. God is the cause of being of the whole universe, the whole world, everything. He causes all of existence, every reality or being that there is. And this means that he's the cause of the essences or natures of things. So he causes there to be finite things like me. He makes my nature as a thinking thing. Similarly, if there are extended things, then he makes or is responsible for their natures as extended things. Now, a nature that's imperfect would contain some not being in it, some unreality. But this is impossible. God could not have created such a nature. Why? Well, take an engineer. An engineer can produce cars that move, but such an engineer can also make cars that don't move or that explode. So if God were like a more powerful engineer, then he could make a human being who has an imperfect nature. So explaining how we can err, how we can make mistakes in knowing stuff, if God were like a powerful engineer, would be easy. But God is not some powerful engineer, right? Engineers go to school, they conform to standards of engineering or fail to, and human beings can fail to conform to standards. The engineer who makes a bad ignition switch fails by the standards of engineering. But God, however, is the standard. Whatever God does is in accordance with the standard. God is not a constitutional king that can fail to be in accord with the law. God is an absolute king. God cannot fail to be in accord with the law. God is the law. And in this way, he cannot fail by the standards of making stuff because he sets the standards. So everything he makes will be perfect in its kind. Everything will have a perfect nature. He's not some human being made bigger. Rather, he is the standard and the source of all human thinking and being. He is the living God that preserves us all, that is the cause of all of our beings. And he's the standard, the perfection. And he sets that standard. He makes that standard. And so he can't make something that's flawed because he makes that standard. And so that sets up the problem of the fourth meditation and gets us a little way into answering it. But before we turn to the fourth meditation, let's consider what we've learned about God and ourselves in the third meditation, or as Descartes puts it, let's pause here and spend some time in the contemplation of God.